I've farmed for a while now, and trust me when I tell you that I've had almost all the terrible things that can happen to a farmer happen to me. All of them. I'll give you some of the accounts I've had. Theft. So this was on the very first flock of chickens that I had, the very, very beginning. And I hired this guy who apparently was an expert. You know, he had been working in chickens before somewhere, and probably he developed a bad relationship with his, former employer, and so the former employer pushed him away. And he was the good guy. From the story, he was the good guy. I wish I had known. The thing is that no farmer ever throws away a good worker. I can tell it from my experience. If I have a really good worker, I do everything that I can to keep them. If I push someone out, it's because they are terrible, and terrible to an unbearable level. So this guy had been pushed out, but well, since he had experience and he knew what to do, I thought it would be a good idea to hire him around on the farm. And when the guy came, he started stealing. He stole so much, it was pathetic. The guy would literally steal the eggs and dig. He had dug a hole inside my chicken house, and he was hiding eggs under, where the chicken house would be. He would dig a hole, dug the concrete away, and then he would put the eggs inside there, cover it with a sack, and then, put the litter and everything inside there. It was really terrible, really terrible. He even had hidden eggs under a sofa set at home. Those days my grandmother used to help me control the chicken house and everything. He hid the eggs under the sofa set, and after we chased him away, after we discovered that we chased him for reasons that were not theft, you understand, it was just bad manners. He wasn't treating my grandmother well, threw him out. And we later discovered that he had even got his own clients. He would get eggs from my chickens, and then he had looked for his own clients. Clients would come to the farm, and they had said, complaining that, hey, they paid their eggs, but they were not getting the eggs. They had paid the money and they were not getting the eggs. And we're like, what do you mean? They're like, we gave this guy money. He kept supplying me eggs, but now he has disappeared. He's no longer supplying eggs. It was really terrible. Bad theft. Also, I've suffered a delayed order. You guys, you don't understand what a delayed order can actually put you out of. There is this company that I decided to order birds from back then, and I think it was July of that year. I had timed it in such a way that I had a flock, and my timing was that once this flock is getting out, the new flock would have started to lay, so I wouldn't lose my customers. So that was around July. Until November, they hadn't supplied the birds. But that's not a problem. Right now that I do supply chicks to clients, I understand that you might have delays that are outside your control. But they didn't even communicate. There is communicating and telling someone, we don't have the birds, you're going to give us 2 more months or 3 more months. And the person decides what to do, whether they should get their money back or, something like that. They would never let me get my money back, number one. Number two, they wouldn't give me a proper date. They would keep telling me, next week we'll give you next week. So it really disorganized me. I had to call my old flock without me having chickens and having eggs. It really caused me a lot of chaos. From there, I had to import birds in from Hungary at that time because I didn't have any other source. The birds came and they died. I lost about, 300 birds in the first week out of 1,000 birds. Can you imagine? 300 birds gone. Really terrible. And that very same flock, I suffered disease with that flock. The birds died. They got what you call fall typhoid. Yeah, fall typhoid struck them just before the point of vaccination. I think it should have been around the 9th week, and they're supposed to vaccinate fall typhoid in the 10th week. They got fall typhoid, they started dying. I lost a huge percentage of the flock. Maybe about 30% of the flock died. Then those that remained, they never really picked up. They were not laying well. They kept getting relapses of the salmonella in them. Inevitably, I had to sell them off. Even the people who were buying them didn't want to offer me the price that, I wanted to get. I was at a disadvantage. Negotiating was difficult because the birds were sick. So just know it was really, really chaotic for me. I suffered with that flock. Then came brokenness, really high feed costs, and I couldn't afford them. At that point, I was working as a doctor, and I was earning my salary, but the price of feeds rose so high, way beyond what I expected, that I couldn't afford the feeds anymore. So I had to keep borrowing money from friends and people, anyone who I thought could give me money. And then I used this money in the flocks. I really suffered. I had to starve. I had to go, days without feeding. A lot of times, I would just eat snacks, just a little bit, survive under $1 a day, just to make sure that I get to the point where the chickens start laying. And then there was COVID-19. Now, that of course affected almost all businesses, but it affected me too. The point comes, you have a lot of eggs, You can't even supply them to anyone. People are not moving. All shops are closed. All businesses are closed. It was terrible. Eggs were just flooding everywhere. I had so many eggs at the farm. I just didn't know what to do with the eggs. Luckily enough, after maybe 2 or 3 weeks of being locked down, people started picking up the eggs, albeit at a really cheap price. But that I also managed to go through. And in the end, when my birds actually were sick, at some point I had to close. After I sold off my birds, I closed the farm because, well, inevitably I would have had to close it, because if you've had an infestation, it's just bright and brilliant that you let go of that flock and keep the farm empty for some time so that you get rid of any form of disease that could have been present. So that's what I ultimately did. I, closed the farm off, and I went out of business for a few months before I managed to get back in. So I understand all the terrible, crazy, difficult times that a farmer can go through. And I have some words that might actually help you go through some of those hard times. The first thing is that never make shortcuts. You need to prioritize quality over shortcuts and saving money. Yeah, it's what's going to keep you in business. I'll tell you guys an experience I had. There was a time when the prices of maize rose really high. They rose really high. And what that meant is that farmers started making shortcuts. Instead of putting maize in the feed, they would just put maize bran, because maize was too expensive. They would just put maize bran alone and no hope for the best. Now, despite the fact that it was really high and I was literally having no margins at all, I made sure that I don't make such shortcuts. What that meant is that my birds still continued producing at a really high rate, 90, 91, 92%, while other farmers' production cut down to 60, 70%. Now, what that meant is that despite the fact that they had cut down their feeding cost, their production, or the efficiency of laying eggs, actually went down lower than even the savings that they were making from cutting the feed cost. Unlike me, despite the fact that I was still paying quite high for the feed, the production was still good enough that I could survive, and these birds were still laying. So what that meant is that for a period of about 2 months, I wasn't making any profit, but I wasn't going out of business. A lot of people that I do know, because they were making shortcuts, their birds cut their laying so terribly that even when they switched back, the birds had gone into a negative nutrition balance, and that meant that getting the birds to lay eggs again became a problem, and a lot of them went out of business. Yeah, they went out of business. Another shortcut you might be forced to do is, because you don't have money, you decide not to vaccinate birds. No, never make shortcuts. Through the hard times, you've got to struggle, find a way to find all the alternative sources you can bring in cash so that you maintain quality. There are a few things you can make shortcuts on, but there are things you can't make shortcuts on. You can't make shortcuts on the feed, you can't make shortcuts on the quality of the birds, and you can't make shortcuts on the vaccines. If you make shortcuts on those things, you're going to pay really terribly. The second thing I've learned is that you've got to learn how to improvise. Now, of course, this seems to counteract what I've just said, but improvising is different from shortcuts. Yeah? There are things where you can improvise when things become difficult. For example, when you're starting out as a farmer and you don't have money, one of the ways you can improvise is by getting locally made feeders and drinkers. They will waste the feed and the water a little bit more, but all you need to do is put in a bit more hard work, and then the improvising will actually work. So you need to make sure that you can improvise, think creatively. Yeah, you really need to think creatively. That's what happens in business. When I had just started the breeder farm, we got to a point which was really complicated, because we started just after COVID. I think it was actually during COVID. And because just before COVID, there was no chickens around, people couldn't get chicks on the market, we thought it was still the same way. So we got the breeder birds in, and then started getting the layers and the broilers. And then when the layers started coming on, the day-old chicks, people were not interested in farming. The prices of feed had become high, there was no market, people had lost money. People were not interested in farming. Now, we had one option. The option I had was to either throw away the chicks or get creative with how to sell the chicks. So one way of improvising was that we decided to brood the chicks so that it becomes a little bit more appetizing. People don't want to brood birds. But if they thought about the fact that brooding has already been done for them, maybe they might be attracted a little bit more to come and buy the chicks, and then we'll find a way of selling. The margins might be a little bit lower, but it's still better than throwing the birds out. We had to think and come up with a solution. It was an improvising. It's not something that was ideally what we wanted, but we had to improvise and actually come up with it. So you've got to learn to improvise through the hard times. Think for solutions. What can you do to avert that problem that you have? If you keep thinking that way, then you're going to get a solution. Number 3 is that the goal through the hard times is always to improve. You know, hard times will always come, but you need to think about the mentality with which you go into the hard times. The goal is to always improve. You need to make sure that you improve. When something bad happens to you, take it as a learning point for your next step. Just make sure that that thing never happens to you. Always improve, always improve. For me, for example, when fall typhoid happened on my farm, I understood the importance of biosecurity, because at that point, I was sharing a chicken house with my dad. So I had my, commercial layers up, and at the bottom, he had his dual purpose bird. And the people who were working in my unit were different from the people who were working in his unit. But we didn't know what he was doing in his unit. I really didn't have control over the flock. So it became quite easy for my birds to pick up an illness from somewhere else. And I believe that's something I learned from that point. I learned and I improved. So with my next flocks, I made sure that such a thing never happens. I don't even keep birds around where my flock is. Yeah, very, very important. So make sure that you learn from your mistakes. Use your mistakes as a stepping stone to move forward, and don't ever consider them or think about them as something that has been brought to throw you down. And finally, learning point number 4 is that it always pays off if you endure. It always pays off. Guys, look at me. I endured from that time. Look at where I have come right now. Yeah, right now I don't have to worry so much. A lot of the things are now in my control. A lot of the things are in my control. I've managed to expand, do a breeder farm. I'm able to supply chicks to very far away places, produce a number of eggs. I'm able to buy feed and store. Why? Because I endured. If I had given up, all this would never have happened. So you've got to endure. It always gets better. With agriculture, it gets better. It's not those businesses which are meant to fail. Yeah? If you learn how to do it well and actually do it well, you will survive and you'll actually start making money. So if you endure, learn from your mistakes, you'll end up at the top. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, smash the notification bell. Check out this video right here where I talk about how I've managed to solve my feed complexion on the farm. Catch you very soon with another video. Lots of love. Bye-bye.